It all started with an invitation, a letter sealed with a wax stamp, an old-fashioned touch that seemed out of place in the modern world. The letter was addressed to me, Emily Parker, and my 4 closest friends, Sarah, Jack, Olivia, and Mark. The contents of the letter were as mysterious as the sender. It was an invitation to spend a weekend at Willow Creek Manor, a mansion none of us had ever heard of, deep in the woods on the outskirts of town. The letter claimed we were the heirs to a vast fortune left by a distant relative. Curiosity got the better of us, and despite our better judgment, we decided to go. The arrival. We arrived at Willow Creek Manor on a chilly Friday evening. The sun was setting, casting eerie shadows across the sprawling estate. The mansion was enormous, with ivy-covered walls and tall, arched windows that seemed to watch us as we approached. A thick fog rolled in, obscuring the twisted trees that surrounded the property. As we stepped inside, the heavy wooden door creaked shut behind us with a finality that made my heart skip a beat. The interior of the mansion was just as old and foreboding as its exterior. Dusty chandeliers hung from the ceiling, and the air was thick with the scent of decay. There were no signs of life, no servants, no caretaker. Just an oppressive silence that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. We explored the mansion, finding room after room filled with antique furniture, faded paintings, and dusty bookshelves. It was as if time had stood still in this place. We found a grand dining room where a feast had been prepared, but the food was cold and untouched. On the table, there was a note in elegant handwriting. "Welcome to Willow Creek Manor. The game begins at midnight." The first night, that night, we settled into our assigned rooms, each more unsettling than the last. My room was at the end of a long, dimly lit hallway. The walls were lined with portraits of stern-faced ancestors, their eyes seeming to follow me as I walked by. As I unpacked, I noticed a peculiar book on the nightstand. Its cover was made of cracked leather, and it had no title. Curious, I opened it to find page after page of strange symbols and drawings, twisted, nightmarish images that made me slam the book shut in fear. Midnight came quickly, and we gathered in the grand dining room, just as the note had instructed. As the old grandfather clock struck 12, the room was plunged into darkness. We heard the sound of chains rattling, followed by the echo of a door slamming shut in the distance. Suddenly, the candles on the table flickered to life, casting a dim, flickering light across the room. Standing at the head of the table was a figure, a tall, gaunt man dressed in black, with hollow eyes and a cruel smile. "Welcome to the game," he said in a voice that sent chills down my spine. "The rules are simple: survive the night, and the fortune is yours. But beware, Willow Creek Manor has a way of revealing the darkest secrets of those who enter." Before we could react, the figure vanished, leaving us in stunned silence. The game had begun. The haunting begins. As the night wore on, strange things began to happen. We heard footsteps echoing through the empty halls, doors creaking open on their own, and the sound of whispers in the walls. But the most terrifying thing was the mirror in the grand hall. It was a massive, ornate mirror that stretched from floor to ceiling, and every time we passed it, we saw something different. At first, it was just subtle changes. Our reflections would be slightly distorted, or we'd catch a glimpse of something moving behind us. But as the night went on, the mirror began to show us our worst fears. Sarah, the most skeptical among us, was the first to crack. She stared into the mirror, her eyes wide with terror as she saw herself trapped in a burning room, flames licking at her skin. She screamed and backed away, but the image in the mirror stayed with her. That night, she didn't sleep, too afraid of what she might see if she closed her eyes. Jack, always the bravest, tried to break the mirror with a chair, but the glass didn't even crack. Instead, the mirror showed him a scene from his past, a car crash that had taken the life of his younger brother. Jack had never spoken about it, but the guilt had haunted him for years. Now it was right there in front of him, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. The game turns deadly. By the next morning, we were all on edge. None of us had slept, and the tension between us was palpable. The The mansion seemed to feed on our fear, growing darker and more malevolent with each passing hour. We decided to stick together, hoping that we could make it through the night if we stayed close. But the game had other plans. That afternoon, we found Olivia in the library, staring at an old photograph. It was a picture of the 5 of us, taken years ago at a summer camp. But something was wrong. Olivia wasn't in the photo. In her place was a shadowy figure, barely visible, but undeniably there. She turned to us, her face pale. "I don't remember this," she whispered. "I don't remember any of it." As she spoke, the room grew colder, and the shadowy figure in the photograph began to move. We watched in horror as it slowly emerged from the photo, stepping into the room with us. It was a twisted, grotesque version of Olivia, with hollow eyes and a gaping mouth. We ran, but the figure followed, relentless in its pursuit. We could hear its footsteps behind us, its raspy breath in our ears. No matter how fast we ran, it was always just a step behind. The first death. Mark was the first to fall. We were in the basement, searching for a way out when the lights went out. In the darkness, we heard a scream, followed by a sickening thud. When the lights flickered back on, Mark was gone. All that was left was a pool of blood and a trail leading deeper into the basement. We followed the trail, our hearts pounding in our chests. It led us to a small hidden room, one that wasn't on any of the mansion's blueprints. Inside, we found Mark's lifeless body, his face twisted in terror. But there was something else in the room, something that made my blood run cold. It was a journal bound in black leather, just like the book I had found in my room. Inside were entries written in a language I couldn't understand, but the drawings were all too familiar. They depicted gruesome scenes of torture and death, and as I flipped through the pages, I realized that they were all of us, each of us meeting a different, horrifying end. The revelation: we were trapped. The doors and windows of the mansion wouldn't budge, and every attempt to call for help was met with silence. It was as if we had been cut off from the outside world, left to face whatever horrors the mansion had in store for us. That night, we gathered in the grand hall, desperate for answers. We searched through old letters, diaries, anything that might give us a clue about what was happening. Finally, we found it. A letter addressed to the original owner of Willow Creek Manor, a man named Elias Blackwood. The letter spoke of a pact, a deal made with a dark entity in exchange for wealth and power. But there was a price, a blood price. Every 50 years, the manor would claim the lives of those who entered, feeding on their fears and using their souls to sustain the pact. We realized too late that we were the latest victims of this twisted game. The final hours. As the night wore on, the mansion's grip on us tightened. The walls seemed to close in, the shadows grew longer, and the air became thick with the stench of death. One by one, we were picked off, each in a more gruesome way than the last. Olivia was next. The shadowy figure that had emerged from the photograph finally caught up with her. We heard her screams echo through the mansion as it dragged her into the mirror, her body twisted and broken. Jack, in a desperate attempt to end the nightmare, set fire to the mansion. But the flames only seemed to fuel the entity's power. The fire spread rapidly, consuming everything in its path. But instead of destroying the mansion, it only made it stronger. The final twist. In the end, it was just me and Sarah, the last survivors of a game we never wanted to play. We made our way to the attic, hoping to find something, anything that could save us. There, we found the heart of the mansion, a twisted altar surrounded by candles, with the same symbols I had seen in the book. In the center of the altar was a black, pulsating heart, beating with an unnatural rhythm. We knew we had to destroy it, but as we approached, the entity appeared before us, its form shifting and twisting. "You cannot win," it hissed. "Your fate was sealed the moment you stepped foot in this house." But we had nothing left to lose. Sarah grabbed the book from the altar, and together, we chanted the words written on the final page. The entity screamed in rage, its form dissolving into shadows as the heart on the altar began to crack. But just as we thought we had won, the final twist revealed itself. The book was a trap, and the ritual we had performed wasn't to banish the entity, but to release it. The heart shattered, and the entity was free, its power unleashed upon the world. The mansion crumbled around us, and I barely managed to escape the collapsing ruins. Conclusion. Now I am the only one left, haunted by the memories of that night. The entity still follows me, a constant shadow in the corner of my eye, a whisper in the darkness. It won't be long before it claims me too. But before it does, I have to warn others. The game never ends, it just moves on to new players, new victims. And if you're reading this, it means you're next. The invitation will come, and you will have no choice but to accept. The game will begin again, and this time, there will be no survivors. So beware the invitation, beware the mansion, and most of all, beware the entity that dwells within. Because once you're in the game, there is no way out.